Remember, from now on we will be being webcast, and not only that, but if you're webcast, it's there for posterity, which can be useful sometimes and not so useful on other occasions. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I think under that heading what I should do is formally report. I know you're all aware that Councillor Harry Smith, for personal reasons, has resigned from the council. I think, judging from the correspondence that I saw go round, the various emails and so on, I think everyone's of a like mind to myself that it's extremely unfortunate that Councillor Harry has decided that he needs to do that. I violently and strongly disagree with what he said in his note, which was that he felt he'd let people in the council down. I think there is absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. He's always been dedicated to the council. All the time I've known him, he's worked harder than most councillors, and I really disagree with him, but he's entitled to his own opinion, obviously. But he will be very sorely missed, and I think we need to record officially our thanks to him for his efforts, because it's on this project alone, on the HLF project alone, he's put in more hours than I care to even think about, but a lot of other things as well. So he will be missed, and it's really sad. I don't know if I know some people have been in touch with him, but I think he's finding things quite difficult at the moment. I know his mother is quite poorly as well, and she's quite some distance away, so that's causing him concern. And I think this was a very difficult decision for him to make. And I know one or two people have spoken to him, and I think, you know, if you get an opportunity to have a chat, he'd probably welcome just having a chat with you. I'm going to ask the clerk now to tell us what effect, if any, that has on our general power of competence, and whether we require to have an election. It's a rhetorical question, because I do know the answer, but not everybody out there will.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The general power of competence, as most of you will be aware, is something which is subject to qualification requirements, one of which is that you have to have a qualified clerk, the other one of which is that 2/3 of the members of the council have to be returned at or as a result of an election. We now fall below that threshold, so as a result of that, if we want to retain the general power of competence, we will need to have an election for the Tavistock North Ward. We'll be formally announcing the vacancy at the next meeting of council in 2 weeks' time, and it's very much to be and we'll be advertising after that. It's very much to be hoped that we'll receive, or that the borough council, as the election authority, will receive a requisition from 10 electors seeking an election in order that we can have someone returned through an election, whether or not that is contested, in order that we can retain the general power of competence, which enables us to do projects such as the Townscape Heritage Initiative scheme.
We would actually be in all sorts of problems with this scheme as well, I think, without the scheme we've been talking about without the GPC as well.
It would be unhelpful. There are different interpretations around the application of the GPC. There is certainly a strong view within the sector that where you have started a project under the general power of competence, even if you fail to meet the qualifying criteria, as long as you're operating on the same project, it continues, because otherwise you can't always stop a project halfway through. And that's the view which we are taking at this moment in time.
Councillor Ewings, please. Oh, right. Oh, good. We're ahead of you. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Right, members, so if we move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Clearly I had to declare an interest because
You didn't
oh, sorry, the apologies. No, I didn't, did I? Quite right. Are there any apologies for absence? There are.
Councillor Hutton and Sheldon, sir.
Thank you. Item.
Sorry. Should you formally record that Councillor Lewis was here and only left 10 minutes ago?
Well, he's
very
not.
Difficult, isn't it?
Well, he's not here for the meeting, so. Yes, he stayed later than he normally does tonight. Item 2, declarations of interest. I clearly need to declare an interest because I am a trustee of Tavistock Heritage Trust. So when, as I suspect we might, come to a vote at the end of the day, I will not actually be taking part in that vote, unless, as we discussed earlier this evening with the clerk and myself, if there were to be a tied vote, only myself holds the power of having the second and or deciding vote. The deputy can't do that, unfortunately. So if we move on to item... Sorry, any other declarations of interest? No? Yes?
I suppose I ought to make an informal one that I have been to the events committee of THT meetings.
Personal interest, not prejudicial.
Yeah.
Okay. Item 3, minutes of council meeting. To confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of March, which are enclosed with your agenda. Any comments, please, or questions, queries, errors on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, sounds like the clerk did this lot, page 7, and page 8. You're all happy I sign them as a correct record? Thank you very much. Are there any matters arising from those minutes that are not covered by this evening's agenda? Mr. Clark, are there anything that you've picked up? Okay. So then, if we move on to item 4, which is the Guildhall Gateway Centre, what I'm proposing to do with this is that the clerk has stunned everyone at the top table by producing what I would call a Winston Churchill, less than a page of A4, that he's going to do by way of introduction. I'm still trying to get over the shock of that, but it's there, it's true, it's there in black and white. So the clerk is going to do a brief introduction to it, and then I think we will throw the whole thing open to questions. There is no point in any of us taking you through the report in detail. You've had it, you've either read it or you haven't read it. Hopefully you have read it, but there is no need, in my view, to go through the report. We can go through for questions, but not for a huge, long introduction. So, Clerk, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The papers that have been circulated set out the position. There is an HLF deadline for response to the offer letter of today, as referred to by the Mayor earlier. Tavistock Heritage Trust have approved the agreement, that's the service level agreement on the lease in principle, and the grant offer that HLF have made is to both Tavistock Town Council and to the Trust. The report before you sets out the various steps it suggested you consider before making a decision regarding the tests and targets, progress in terms of the agreement, grant terms and conditions, and other matters. In summary, the community and heritage benefits of the project are substantially unchanged. Costs and financial risks to the Council have gone up, and our delivery partner has done less to demonstrate its resilience and sustainability than we perhaps might have expected. With regard to the lease and service level agreement, it provides the option for the Council to terminate if the approved purposes or approved usage of the grant are not delivered, also if after 5 years financial support for THT exceeds a set threshold. More generally, the lease/SLA agreement before you probably represents the minimum that each negotiating team could find potentially acceptable, and the final legal form is still to be agreed. If, having considered all the relevant factors, the Council is minded to accept the HL offer, it is recommended that it is subject to, firstly, HLF being agreeable to the terms of the final terms of the lease/SLA, and the lease/SLA meeting the requirements of the Council solicitors in form and content. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
What I'm going to do now, and I didn't warn him of this, so this is probably a hospital pass, but it shouldn't be. I'm going to ask Mr. Hall just to set out clearly. There's a reference in the documents, and the clerk's just made further reference to the fact that the current lease SLA is not necessarily in the format that would be acceptable to our legal advisors for Anstey. And I think that what I want to get clear is it is not the content specifically, it's the manner in which things are actually set out. So I think Mr. Hall can probably give us some guidance on that. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. At present, just to the Council are fully aware, we have a lease, and then we have a sitting alongside it the service level agreement, which essentially sets out the financial elements of the deal and how the parties will interact with each other. Excellent that the parties, the Council and THT, have obviously been engaging with one another and talking about the what goes into the SLA in particular, the financial element. I think we are at a point now where the council solicitors would consider that to be a detailed heads of terms, setting out the principles of the agreement. And I think we're now at a point where what's been agreed, the principles need to be put into a legal format, and by that I mean not necessarily detracting from the content of what is in the SLA, but actually putting it into a legal document. The reason, the importance of this is really so it can stand the test of time. I think that this is a 20-year agreement. It's a very long, hopefully going to be a very long and successful project. But obviously, councillors change, trustees change. What may be perfectly acceptable to the parties at the moment in its current form, 10 years down the line, might not be. So we need to have something which will stand the test of time and can be interpreted and will mean exactly what it means today in 10, 15, 20 years' time. So that's very much the council solicitor's view, is that it simply needs to be put into a legal format now, and I think we've reached that point where the principles have now been agreed to put it into that format.
Thank you for that. I think also I would point out to the members around the table that Foot Anstey, I'm sure, would like to think that THT will engage legal representation so that it actually makes life a little bit easier when two lawyers talk to each other, because the language isn't always the same. But did you want to add anything to that, Mr. Hall?
No, I was just to agree entirely with that. I think we're at that point now where THT should be engaging lawyers and having some legal advice on it. I think that may well actually seek to address some of the concerns and issues which the trustees may have around this agreement as a whole.
Thank you very much. So, members, you've all had the report, you've all read it several times, no doubt. Councillor Ewing, start with you, shall we?
May I just ask a question? Could the clerk repeat his comments about the TRT have not...
Sorry, THT or THI or?
THT.
Right.
Yes, you may recall that when we met in January, we reviewed the progress against the various tests and targets, both of the Council and of Tavistock Heritage Trust. I spoke to, not at the last meeting, but the meeting on the 11th of April, and with the representatives who were there present, and they said that there had been no significant progress against those tests and targets. So all that is reflecting is that we're more or less in the same position as we were in January of this year with regard to those.
Can I explore that further? How do our Foot Anstey view that comments that have been made against the risk that we're putting ourselves to?
Mr. Hall, is it fair to ask you that question or not?
I think we're sort of bordering on the legal privilege.
Okay.
Yeah, I also think it's a bit, we might need to go into part two, but I also think it's a bit of an unfair question because I don't think you've actually been involved in the tests and targets that was...
No.
I'll ask the clerk to respond, and I think...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, just to clarify, the tests and targets were the things that were set around things like fundraising up to a certain threshold, volunteer base, fundraising strategy. There were a series of activities which fell within that, and they were very much around how one builds organisational resilience and demonstrate sustainability going forward, in much the same way as we set some tests and targets for ourselves as a council, where we talked about whether or not the project itself was affordable and deliverable, if it was affordable and deliverable, whether or not THT represented the appropriate delivery partner, and so on and so forth. So there were a series of those which were put together by the council at the time. And so all that one-liner in there is doing is reflecting the current position, which, in fairness, is probably also substantially unchanged in terms of our progress against the targets we set ourselves as well.
Councillor Williamson, please.
Stand.
Please.
At a previous meeting, I assessed this risk we're facing to be of two elements, a business risk and a financial risk. The business risk falling to Tavistock Heritage Trust, the financial risk falling to the council. this evening meeting Mr Andrew Main actually provided, after 2 previous encounters with Tavistock Heritage Trust as a deputised member in an emergency, has actually provided a lot more reassurance, and perhaps we should have been briefed at that level a lot earlier by the Trust, but it's probably not the Chair's fault or the Trust's fault. And when we got the decision that the lottery were going to give us the money in November, I said to somebody in the previous leadership role of the Trust that the work really started there, and it seems that it did. And this enterprise, for it is really an enterprise, the business risk I was talking about, has been got hold of, and we've heard tonight what the Heritage Trust are expecting to achieve, and I thought Mr Main was quite realistic that the business plan written by somebody else was not his and the Trust's, but presumably it will provide a platform and they're thinking about it. So I was much reassured in the space of a week from where I had personal concerns about the resilience of this trust, that it was probably on track. Regarding the financial risk, it's a tail and dog kind of thing. If the business is sound, then the financial risk probably is acceptable. But that's a decision for all of us here tonight. It is a big risk. It worries me that we might be asking for more money to be raised on the council tax or the precept. But if we've got this fantastic trust, this business operating in its 2-year build-up phase, and it looks like it's okay, and in the first 3 years, I think we've put a 5-year cap on it in this SLA. If it's not working then at the period of the first review, we've got to stop on it, essentially, and the Trust has agreed that. So, in the round, I am now much more reassured. I'm still frightened for the ratepayer and our council in that we're taking a significant risk, but I think it's an acceptable risk. And Andrew said himself, he's taken a lot of risks in his life. Personally, I have, but not in this arena. So I am a risk taker, and provided you can control that risk, which I think we have, then I would vote very much strongly in favour of supporting the THT bid, or whatever we're going to be asked for tonight.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson, would you like to, as one of the longest serving and more stable thinking of the councillors, I think, in the sense that you're not given to making wild statements like some of us are. And I'm talking about myself in the latter.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I joined alongside Councillor Williamson, and we were asked a couple of weeks ago to step in as an emergency thing. It's made me revisit all of the papers, all of the background, to think back to the origins of this idea and the concept of the Town Council acquiring the Guildhall and making a project out of it, rather than it just being left for year after year after year to decay, because that's what was happening, and the police moved out quite a long time ago, and they, to be quite honest, hadn't perhaps looked after it as best as it could have been. It's a beautiful building. I want to see the Guildhall project succeed. I want to see it up and running. It's been closed for far too long. We need a strong working partnership to make that happen, and I believe, having attended the 2 meetings, that we can do that with the Tavistock Heritage Trust. We have worked, well, certainly lots of people have worked for a long time to get the service level agreement into a format that can now be taken by our solicitors to hopefully move that on and get a final agreement with that, along with the lease. I have long believed that Tavistock needs to be a destination venue. I think we need to attract a lot of wealthy foreign visitors to the town. Lots of you will know my views on some of the other people that we attract to the town who I don't think have a huge amount of spending capacity. We need to get people in here who can spend money to keep our businesses going, to make sure that we are a town, a good destination town that people want to come to. So I'd like to support this as well.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in the Deputy Mayor now, because I know he's had various discussions and looked at various elements, and of course he's had the benefit of being in Brisbane for 3 or 4 weeks. He's had plenty of thinking time, complete with tinny in one hand and pen in the other, no doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your description of my time in Brisbane isn't wholly accurate, but in fact I was only away for just over 2 weeks, but an awful lot seems to have happened in those 2 weeks, and I feel as I'm just catching up. But just by way of explaining any incoherence, my body clock thinks that it's about 6 o'clock in the morning now, so I'm perhaps not firing on all cylinders. I feel deeply committed to the project. It is completely unacceptable that a building of that quality should be unused and that it is at risk of decaying further. So there is no question something has to be done with it. It has to be brought back into public use. It has to be made available to the townsfolk and our visitors. Is this the right project? It is a project that has had much thought, as we were hearing earlier on, and it hasn't just come out of the air. It has relevance. It has relevance to what else is going on in West Devon and in Cornwall, and I believe it should go ahead. I have reservations about the trust. It is very young. However, I think the description of the trust's activities in the last few months given by Mr. Main was very impressive. And one of the things I have noticed is on social media, the trust has become very much a presence. And I think I can't turn on Facebook now without there being at least one posting about a Heritage Trust activity. And that is to be commended because it is becoming known now and becoming more in the public eye. I did find some of the descriptions of the future plans of the Trust rather vague and aspirational, but I think what has been achieved so far can give us some comfort and reassurance for what is to come in the future. The risks financially for the council and therefore for the ratepayer are indeed large. I think they probably are acceptable, but before forming a final view on that, I await further debate and discussion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ewings, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having been involved in the World Heritage since its inception, of bringing it to this town, and sitting here when we've debated about the acquisition of the Guildhall, even when we had our first opportunity to buy it and we turned it down and we went at the second opportunity, we've always supported it. We mainly supported this, if we go back in memory, because we wanted the building to stay in public usage. Because there was that bit, it was going to become flats stroke apartments. And if you remember, we all had the debate about once they put their foot outside the front door, they were straight away on town council property. So we went through all of that debate and we went ahead with the acquisition. But we always went ahead knowing that what we wanted was for this building to be the gateway to the eastern side of the World Heritage Site. The World Heritage Site has always been very important to me, as you all know, to be able to show what went on in the mining and everything else in this area, the usage of the canal and all the other facilities that are around here, the mining houses like we've got one there, all the engine houses, we all know and see. We want other people to appreciate it. Along with Councillor Sanders, for many years, we have always been, why can there not be a brown sign at Salton saying, come to Tavistock, basically? There isn't one. You know, the first sign you get to see for Tavistock is after that Oakhampton turn-off. There needs to be more. Some people, and I think Councillor Sanders, in his capacity as a county councillor, along with other county councillors from this part of Devon, have said that there needs to be more prominence for this town. We have to now work with Tavistock Heritage Trust to bring about that. I was pleased to hear Councillor Ward's words on how much has improved on the events side. I went to the first meeting, and the work we got done in our first meeting of ideas, we had the management of the Bedford Hotel with us, and they are really behind this project, and they have offered to put on some of these events for us. There is goodwill amongst the town. I sit on the bid, as you know. I am a Rotarian, so I've seen, you know, Mr. Main pop round these meetings, as he does. And, you know, there is goodwill there through the community organisations. Yes, there is a risk. And yes, the two big risks are THT itself, as we all know, but they know we're aware of that risk. They are acutely aware, I think is the expression, Mr. Main, is that correct? Of the risk. But also, we have to, as I've kept saying tonight, when we make our decisions, we have to bear in mind the ratepayers of this town. Do they want this facility to be brought back to life and to be able to open up the town for more visitors and for more people to want to come and live here? And I personally think the answer is yes. So I will be supporting what we have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ewins. Councillor Roberts, have you got anything you wish to say? It's not compulsory? Absolutely not compulsory, just giving you a chance if you want to. Councillor Venning, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, from a personal point of view, my wife has lived in Tavistock all her life, and we were talking about the Guildhall. Sorry, we were talking about the Guildhall, and she's fully in favour of that, and therefore, being under control, I'm also in favour of it.
Councillor Palfrey, is there anything you'd like to add to the debate?
I'll say something, I guess. I do support the fact that the building shouldn't be left to rack and ruin, much as I would agree to any of the buildings in Tavistock not just falling apart, because it doesn't attract people to the town. I like Tavistock, that's why I choose to live here. I like to think that Tavistock is a nice place to live and a nice place to visit. I do have some concerns still around THT and the viability of it. I still have concerns around the financial commitment the council is going to take. I'm not a risk taker. However, I will listen to what everybody says and make my decision when the vote comes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sanders, you wish to add anything?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Councillor Wickham?
Yes, I agree with the proposal to accept this, but have reservations on the THT thing. I'm very worried about that side of it, but yes, I think we've got to go ahead.
Thank you very much. Councillor Crawford, anything you wish to say?
Sorry, I think I'd echo what Councillor Palfrey said, actually. I am concerned that THT is quite a young organisation. I'm concerned about whether it's actually able to meet the fundraising commitments. And I am very concerned about the additional costs to the taxpayer in terms of risk, the financial risk to this council. So I'm really not sure.
That's fine. There's no obligation on you to make a decision at this precise moment. Councillor Squire, would you like to add?
Thank you very much. I share with some other councillors reservations, partly due to the magnitude of this particular project. Yet I still want to see Tavistock become a thriving and utilised place. I've had my wife appear in court in the Guildhall, so I want it reserved as a particular historical piece of evidence for that part of her behaviour. And I would like to see that the council supports the work that members have taken in the past few years to bring this project to a head. So, whilst I personally have reservations, it's probably due more to ignorance than it is due to anything else. And that I would like to support what the council have been working on to ensure that we bring this forward as a piece of practice which is realised. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Was that comment about your wife TMI or not? Too much information, or?
It may take you back to the days of the poll tax.
Oh, right. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Members, are any other questions or queries before? Because I think we need to move this to a conclusion. If there aren't any further queries, questions or items of debate, I'm going to look to move a recommendation in a moment, but I don't want to do that until I'm sure that everybody thinks they've had sufficient information. You all happy with that? I did ask the clerk if, because the papers we've got before us tonight are don't give a precise recommendation, which I think is what we need, and he has been scribbling quietly in the corner. Would you like to place before the members what you consider would be an acceptable recommendation? Bearing in mind this is a big decision, the wording of the recommendation needs to be right. It will be there long after I've shuffled off this mortal coil, you know, it needs to work for posterity. We all know what happens when we don't get things right, because we've had to pick up the pieces from past errors. So over to you, Mr. Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Taking on board the comments that have been made and following the format of the report, I think that, and please correct me if you feel that I'm mistaken, what we're saying is that there is effectively a three-part resolution. The first part is that Tavistock Town Council endorses the proposed service level agreement and lease, subject to the approval of Heritage Lottery the Heritage Lottery Fund, and the final form being agreed by the council solicitors. The second is that the Council accepts the terms of the Heritage Lottery Fund grant and the associated conditions. And thirdly, which relates to those conditions, it confirms that it complies with paragraphs 4.3 and 4.4 of the report, or that it endorses those, because those actually set out the responses to some of the special terms and conditions of grant relating to the power under which we make it and some of the associated arrangements.
Right, can you just go back and read out number 1 again? I think Councillor Ewings has possibly got a question or a query or a disagreement. I'm not sure which, but can you just read that one on its own slowly first, please?
That Tavistock Town Council endorses the proposed service level agreement and lease, subject to the approval of Heritage Lottery Fund and the final form being agreed by the council solicitors.
Sorry, Councillor Ewings?
Just a query, because we've said earlier in the evening, and I haven't been privy to the meetings that you've attended, but do THT have their own lawyers been through this document? Because you said a couple of times tonight they have to have their own lawyers.
No, they don't as yet. They recognise that they will need to do that, but our understanding is that the trustees are reasonably content with, as I think Mr. Hall described earlier on, what is fairly detailed heads of terms. Therefore, unless their lawyers find something which is liable to cause a major problem, there shouldn't be an issue. But Mr. Hall looks as though he wants to add something.
Yes, thank you. Apologies for not standing up previously. Yes, I mean, you're absolutely correct. We have a detailed set of heads of terms. It's not going to be a couple of hours job to put this into a legal format, just so that the council is aware that this will require some significant work, and it will take time to get to that stage. But the key is obviously to have THT to have their own solicitors in order to advise them, and obviously that will hopefully assist with the negotiation process on the intricacies of the drafting.
Okay, Brian. So could you please then, I think what I'm going to do to make life easier, are any of those dependent on each other, or are they independent effectively? I suppose if number 1 falls, then the rest do, is that right? Well, could you just please read number 1 again slowly, and I will then formally move it and hopefully get a seconder and we'll take that to the vote.
First one is that Tavistock Town Council endorse the proposed service level agreement and lease, subject to the approval of Heritage Lottery Fund and the final form being agreed by the council solicitors.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Is there any debate, members, or are you happy to move to a vote? Those in favour, then please show.
That is carried unanimously.
Thank you very much. Would you now read the second recommendation, please?
That the Tavistock Town Council accept the terms of the Heritage Lottery Fund grant offer.
Okay, I will move that formally. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Ewings. Any debate? Those in favour, then please show.
And again, that is carried unanimously.
Thank you. And would you read number 3 for us, please?
Was it unanimous?
I think so,
I was
was it?
looking at yes,
Yes.
it was. Thank you. Sorry.
It was, yeah.
And the third one.
NEMCON, go on.
And that the Tavistock Town Council confirms it endorses and complies with the matters as set out in paragraphs 4.3 and 4.4 of the report.
I'm happy to move that recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ewings. Does anyone wish to debate that? Or are you happy to move to a vote? Councillor Ewings, you... Those in favour then please show.
And again, that is unanimous.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, members. Your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren will either think you were genii or they will curse you. I don't know. I don't know quite what. Mr. Main, thank you very much for your attendance this evening. I've no doubt that you and the clerk will be in communication, and I think, although technically we're still in open session, I'm going to sort of slightly break the rules and just ask, can we have your assurance that you will have some legal representation in place in the near future?
We have already opened discussions with 3 firms to try and get the quotes.
Okay, that's fine. As soon as we've got that information, I think that would obviously be helpful. It would certainly make Fred Anstey's job a lot easier as well. But thank you very much for that. So if we move on, I don't know whether Mr. Hall, we need to detain you any further. I mean, you're very welcome to stay, by all means, but it's not. Off the clock. You're welcome to stay. It's entirely up to you. But I hopefully there's not going to be some legal issues around the tendering process.
I'll make shoot off. I'll make shoot off in that case. That's,
So I'm not trying to get rid of you. I'm quite happy to have you here, but
I'll stop the clock now. It's fine.
But okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming this evening. It has been certainly worthwhile having you present because I was able to have a chat beforehand as well. And perhaps Mr. Main looks as though he might bend your ear on the way out as well. I don't know yet. You're going to bend his ear? I thought you might. All right. Okay. Right, members, if we can move on then, please, to item 5, which says it's been circulated for information only. So are you suitably informed? Clerk's going to change his mind about it being for information only now. Yeah.
Almost all of it is for information only. I should just draw attention in particular to paragraph 4.1, which relates to the reference of the General Manager to the outcome of the recent tendering for the public realm contract and the pannier markets around. I don't know whether he wishes just to say a little bit about that, because things haven't worked out quite as we had anticipated they might.
There doesn't appear to be anything to do with the public realms works. In item 5 it talks about resurfacing in the Meadows, Pannier Market refurbishment.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. 4.1 is the recommendation. Paragraph 2.4 is the paragraph which actually relates to it. I don't know if the General Manager wants to add something to that, just by way of outline as to why we've brought this before members now.
Well, members, it's not for information, sadly. General Manager, please.
We've been through a tender process for the public realm. We've had 2 returns. Myself, the tender board, the architect aren't satisfied with those 2 returns with the due diligence that we've undertaken. To ensure we get best value for money, we feel that we need to re-tender the project. By re-tendering, realistically, that means that the public realm works will most likely be carried out after the summer season now, which will be around the period of October, November this year.
Okay. Councillor Yates.
May I ask a question about 221, Bob's Cafe and office relocation, please?
Is this something appropriate to take in open session, or do we need to move into part 2 for it?
I think if we're going to go into detail on that, we probably ought to move into part 2.
Okay.
Well, if there are no other questions, because it is for information only, item 5, we can move to part 2 now, if members are. Thank you. We will move into part 2 then.
Sorry, I was looking at the General Manager.